And a very warm welcome to this very special colloquium that we are having today on the occasion of International Women's Day. So we will have with us our speaker for the day, Professor Gagandeep Kang. And I thought it is very have her today who has been working on the forefront of this entire pandemic during the last 1 year. And this year we are celebrating International Women's Day with the theme given by the UN, which is Women in Leadership, Achieving in a COVID-19 world. And how could we choose a better speaker than Professor Kang for this theme today? I invite our director, Professor Saurabh Pal, to briefly introduce Professor Kang to the audience today before we begin the talk.
Thank you, Anandita. I must first make acknowledgements and gratitude to Professor Kang for accepting our invitation for the ISER Kolkata International Women's Day. I think all of you know or can imagine how busy she is over not just last 1 year, over many, many years. And I know that today in particular, she had multiple schedules. I know a few of them myself, which she has to attend or give talk. So I'm very grateful to Professor Kang for accepting our invitation despite so many schedule clash. First, I would like to say that this is a very special day, International Women's Day, as all of you know. And this actually started as some kind of a movement for the women's rights. And the history says that the Socialist Party of America organized a Women's Day in New York City in February 28, 1909. And then eventually it was proposed to have 1910 International Women's Conference as a special Women Day will be organized there. So that was the proposition. And finally, this day was accepted by United Nations to be celebrated as an International Women's Day. And I think this is probably formalized in 1977 by the United Nations. But the history of this day as a women's rights movement has been there for a very long time. So the commemoration today ranges from being a public holiday in certain countries, and in many places, it had been also a day of protest. But today, in most of the places in the world and in India, we celebrate womenhood. I think various achievements that the women had in various forums, and we wish, of course, the best that they achieve to their abilities. And I think it's extremely important to celebrate this day. It's basically an awareness day for all others. What are the rights? And I think on that count, we also invite very eminent people to organize these events. Unfortunately, because it's an online event, our organization was limited to a talk. But then, what a speaker we have. It's a one-off talk, but a speaker like Professor Gagandeep Kang, who, as Anandita said, has been in the forefront of the virus, the COVID virus, in last 1 year, but has been a great scientist by his own right for a very long time. In fact, I had, of course, very details biodata of Gagandeep Kang, which I not like to read because all of you know her very well. She is in the media. She comes everywhere. I mean, so all of you have read about her. But just for record, I would say that she was born in Simla. I don't know if most of you know. She was born in Simla, I think in November 1962, if I remember. I don't remember the exact date. I think 3rd of November is what I read somewhere. Yes, am I right? Yeah. Okay, thank you. She, of course, had a Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Surgery in 1987, and then MD in microbiology from CMC Vellore. And CMC Vellore is where she now belongs to. She was, of course, the director of the Translational Health Science Institution in around Delhi, Faridabad, I think, for some time. But obviously, her heart is in Vellore, and she has gone back from the directorship to being again a professor at the Christian Medical College, Vellore. She has, of course, done a lot of research abroad in her early days, and is one of the most prominent persons in the biomedicines today. In fact, she is a professor at Wellcome Trust Research Laboratory and the Division of Gastrointestinal Sciences at the Christian Medical College. She has conducted interdisciplinary research on enteric infections and child health. Her team has evaluated vaccines in the preclinical and clinical phase 1-3 studies for rotavirus and cholera. So it's one of the first things that has come from India, the vaccine, actually from her group. She is a member of many WHO advisory committees, is the vice chair of the board of Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, and also chairs the Immunization Technical Advisory Group on the WHO's Southeast Asian region. Of course, you can imagine that somebody of her stature would be recognized, and she is indeed recognized by several awards and honors. But most importantly, she is the first Indian women scientist to be elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society in the 359 years of its history. She was also the 9th woman to be awarded the Infosys Prize, which all of you know is a very, very prestigious prize. She is, of course, the first Indian and also the first woman to edit Manson's textbook of the tropical medicines. She has, of course, received many other awards. Early days, she got Dr. P. N. Berry Fellowship, the Yadnapalli Award for Excellence, Women Bioscience Awards, and so on. So I think she has played a very significant role, particularly in the vaccine research. And she had also today, when we are debating on the COVID vaccines, she has contributed to the debate and the knowledge on this issue. So today, of course, she has a talk, which I think she's going to announce now on slightly different. It's not going to be vaccines, but she's going to cover all of our journey, I believe, in the research. So I think it's a great day to celebrate the Women's Day with Professor Gagandeep Kang, none other than Professor Gagandeep Kang. And we'll all like to hear you, madam. So the stage is yours, Professor Gagandeep Kang.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul. I always feel a little ridiculous sometimes when people say so many nice things about me because I don't feel like I deserve it at all. But anyway, thank you very much. And so, what I thought I'd do is very quickly tell you about how I got to where I am currently. And then we can open up for questions on SARS-CoV-2, on vaccines, on women in science, whatever you would like. So this is titled Nevertheless We Persist, a career in 10 chapters. And the reason I chose this title is because this is something that was said about Nancy Pelosi, the US speaker, uh, who essentially persisted in asking questions of Donald Trump. And I guess the only attribute that I think I have that is valuable is I've lived in Howrah, I've lived in Calcutta, in Alipur, and in Garden Reach. I lived in Kanchrapara. I lived in Purulia district in Adra and went to school in all of these places. My mother was an English teacher and my father was an engineer in the railways. So we really moved around a lot from railway to railway and place to place. So I learned very early to deal with new situations, learned how to pack up books and move literally at weeks' notice. We spent a lot of time living on trains. So I guess I learned a little bit to survive and be adaptable. When it came to writing the medical entrance exams, I wrote them first in 1980 and then I did not get in. I made the interviews for AFMC, but I didn't get any of the medical colleges that I wanted to go to. And because I didn't have domicile, that was even harder. So I went to Delhi to do a BSc in zoology, and during that time, thought I would write the entrance exams again. And the next time I wrote the entrance exams, I got into a lot of different places and chose Vellore because I had heard about what a wonderful time students in Vellore had. And also, it was about 2,000 kilometers away from my parents who were in Lucknow at that time. So it was the first time where I came to a place that was new for everybody else and new for me. I had been used to being the new girl by myself, but this was really fun to have a platform where we were all new and we were all learning together. So I spent a lot of time making friends, and I spent a lot of time not attending too many classes. You know, when you have 80% attendance requirements, then you attend exactly 80% of your classes. I spent a lot of time working on plays. I can't sing, I can't dance, uh, but I was very handy with crafts. So I became responsible for organization and for particularly stage management. And I think one of my proudest achievements is doing all the costumes and props for a musical, Evita, in 1983. So, from learning to organize, I think I probably learned many of the skills that I still use today. And I finished medicine on time. And since I was an open candidate, I did not have a bond to do. Uh, so in CMC, other people who are sponsored by their churches had to serve for 2 additional years. I didn't have that requirement. So I was really quite confused about what I wanted to do next. So I had to figure out what PG I wanted. I had entered medical college thinking I was going to be a psychiatrist because I'd read lots of books about psychiatrists and psychologists and thought it was really cool to study things like personality disorders. And during medicine, I had enjoyed ophthalmology very much. So I came to Delhi to explore the idea of doing ophthalmology and worked in the All India Institute for a year. But then decided, because my future husband was in Vellore, that I wanted to go back to Vellore, and decided then to do microbiology. And when I wound up doing micro after 3 years of doing microbiology, I realized this wasn't quite what I wanted to do because it was something that was very routine, and I like to be working on new projects and new things. So when I was offered a job at the Wellcome Trust Research Laboratory to do research as a full-time job, I couldn't think of uh, you know anything else being as attractive, and decided to go there and do that. The question, of course, is asked when you do medicine. Uh, do you think that research is what you want to do full time? Good doctors and good nurses are supposed to treat patients, to manage them. In a country like India, particularly, where we have insufficient healthcare workers for delivery of care, should we really be focusing on research? And I heard something from an alumnus of Vellore that has stayed with me forever. He said that, if I treat a patient, how many patients a day can I see? 10, 20, 50, 100. And if I think about making a new drug, over a lifetime of clinical care, I will probably see 150,000 patients. But if I make a drug or vaccine immediately, that is something that can potentially benefit millions of people and continue to benefit them over time, in addition to all the other things that accrue from an understanding of how that drug or vaccine works. So I think when we think about whether research is a necessity or a luxury, I firmly come down on the side of this being an absolute necessity to make the drugs, diagnostics, vaccines that we need for the future. So in Vellore, having joined the faculty, done a PhD, the question always arises of, do you want to stay here for the rest of your life? Do you want to go somewhere else? So I got a fellowship to go first to the Public Health England, and there I did my membership of the Royal College of Pathology, which was important, which gave me street credibility in a sense on an international stage. And then after that, I went to the Baylor College of Medicine, where I worked with Mary Estes, and she is the best rotavirus scientist in the world, no question. So, the one thing about being in the UK and the US, and this is what I tell all of my students, is you actually working in India, you don't know how good you are because you have no international benchmarks. It's when you go overseas and you realize that you're as good or better than the best that they have to offer, that you recognize that the level of competition in India is so much that if you do reasonably well in India, you will do very, very well in other parts of the world. So I learned that, and that was incredibly empowering to actually feel like I was somebody who could contribute. Having chosen research as a profession in a community like CMC, where you know people who are clinicians are the most highly ranked, and what I was doing was laboratory and public health research, so lower down on the pecking order, it was nice to have the validation that I got overseas. I also had the opportunity to stay in both places with a membership of the Royal College of Pathology. I could have started to work in the UK, could have worked in the US. But then I thought about it and thought, I have a clinical background, I have laboratory skills, I have a huge interest in public health. And these three very rarely come across as a combination in India. So if I really want, if I go back to India, I will be doing things that very few people in India do. Whereas if I stay on in the UK or the US, I will be doing pretty much what lots of people are capable of doing. So I think this is important for people who think about where they want to work. In 85% of illness is in the poorer parts of the world, but only 4% of the research. And there are many things that are very glamorous. Cancer research, for example, neurosciences. These are the kinds of things that seem attractive to students. What I've done all my life is study diarrhea. And if there is anything that is less glamorous than diarrhea, I have yet to find it. So, as a researcher, as an academic, what do? I help the government set priorities, the policies for rotavirus vaccination, for example. I carry out research projects that are needed to build evidence or to test products or to formulate policies, and that is operational research. I also translate results into practice in India. And the greatest pleasure of my life is extend and reinforce research and training, which is basically working with younger people, which is something that I really enjoy doing. So, how did my research get to a point where I was able to do all of this? Well, I really got thrown off the deep end because I thought I was going to lead the lab part of the studies where I worked with public health researchers and they did the public health pieces. But essentially, what happened was that my collaborator became principal of CMC, so I had to learn to do the public health part of it as well. Not just have an interest in it, but learn every aspect of how it needed to be done. So a lot of multitasking, filling in at the clinic when the doctor didn't turn up on a day, designing surveys, supervising people, building the lab up, all happening at the same time. Wherever there was a gap, we had to figure out a way to uh, fill that gap. And we were working on projects that were unpredictable. We had no idea of what we were going to find. We were looking for a correlate of protection for rotavirus, and none had been found in 20 years of rotavirus research. And actually, we've come 20 years since I started these projects, and we still have not found a correlate of protection. But in that search, we have really learned a lot. So was working in the community, working outside of the hospital. And the one thing that you realize when you work with the community is that your project can finish. And in a hospital, when your project finishes, it's over and done with. In the lab, when your project finishes, you're finished. But when you work with a community, your commitment does not end when the project does. You've come into this community, you've asked people to participate in your studies, and if you have provided anything to them, you have to make sure that that is something that is sustained. So, for example, we had started a clinic in the area, and at the end of the project, we couldn't just stop the clinic and stop offering people care. So, scrambling to make sure that there were resources available to continue to provide that care to people was absolutely essential. Now it's been 15 years since our first project finished, but we've learned a lot. We've persisted. We've learned that we need to continue to work with these communities. And not only has that been a moral responsibility for us, we've also learned a lot. For example, the children that I recruited into a cohort in 2001 are still part of the study now. They've been through adolescence. They are at a stage where they have finished their education. They are going out to work. And we've learned, though this was not what we started out to study, that in slum areas, children do quite badly. They look healthy. If you look at this picture of two children, both of them look healthy, both of them look happy. But the child who is dressed in black and blue has actually a 7 centimeter height deficit. And
Professor
that
Kang,
height, yes.
sorry to interrupt. Your slides have not been moving actually. I thought you were doing this, you're just talking, but your slides are stuck.
Stuck at what? Because I'm on a
At
slide
the
called,
title slide.
oh
I
gosh.
just thought you
So
speak. If you could just go to the slide full view, the projection
I
view, then
was
it will be.
in I was in projection view. Can you see
No, it
the?
hadn't gone to projection actually.
So
Sorry.
shall I just, can you project the slides, Anindita, and I will talk through them?
I can, but it's
So I'll
moving.
stop
If you,
sharing. So I think it'll move if it's not in full view. Can you see a
it is
career
moving
in?
now. Yes, yes,
Okay.
it is moving now.
So this was
Sorry
describing my
about this.
journey.
I just
Yeah,
didn't
no
want to
problem.
interrupt.
No problem. So I described my journey in medical school, and basically it was a lot of fun. Probably didn't go to class as much as I should have, but I think I learned a lot from the experience of being a student, and Vellore gives you a great grounding in research. I moved on to do a post graduation, ultimately in microbiology, but a funny kind of microbiology because I do a lot of public health research. And the reason that I do it is because I think research is an absolute necessity in our country. And if people choose different things depending on the drivers they have, and for me the driver was very much, what is it that I can contribute in India that I couldn't do otherwise? It's very clear that the need is here, and we need to think about how we address that need together. I've had, over the past 20 years, after coming back from the US, had really interesting experiences. I think the communities that I work with have just taught me so much about how people live, what their problems are, and what is it that we can and can't do to solve their problems. And for me, the biggest learning is how much is hidden in terms of disease that we don't really see, and stunting or chronic malnutrition, and how it impacts the physical and the developmental growth of children is one of those that I think is something that we need to surface, that we really need to address. If you think about normal IQ, it's 100, and in Vellore, if you go to any English medium school, it's usually a little bit over 100. In the slum areas we work with, the median IQ, the average IQ is about 89, and even that is low normal. And even in that, if you have children that are stunted, like this child in the black and blue here, he will have an even lower than that median IQ. And we know that IQ percentage actually drives your ability to get a job and to function in society. So this is a huge hidden burden of disease. Now, when I think about the work that I've done, and everybody knows that we work on rotavirus, what many people don't know is that I have not developed a vaccine. I've tested a vaccine. And for a pretty long time, I was working, trying to figure out if vaccines would work. So in the early 2000s, Indian scientists were developing two new rotavirus vaccines. And we had data that showed that one vaccine out of those two was very unlikely to work, because we were studying rotavirus disease in the community, and any which way we looked, we could not see that any children who were infected with this virus from which the vaccine strain had been derived, there was no protection in them, which seemed to indicate that a vaccine was very unlikely to work. Now, the research community did not want to hear this kind of negative news. So we were persona non grata for quite a while. We were not invited to meetings. We were not asked to participate in research projects. We had trouble getting our papers published, but we persisted. And it finally turned out that the findings that we had were true. That particular vaccine candidate was dropped, was no longer developed, and then we became part of the community again. Now, in the background, we had been already doing our community-based studies, our hospital studies, and that allowed us to build these disease burden estimates, showing us just how important a problem rotavirus was. 1 in 2 children was getting infected every year. 1 in 8 children was going to an outpatient clinic with diarrhea. 1 in 30 children was being hospitalized, and 1 in 350 children was dying of rotavirus diarrhea in 2011. So this clearly showed how much of a problem rotavirus was. And because by this stage we had built credibility in rotavirus research, we were asked to participate in the phase 3 vaccine trial of Rotavac, which is the vaccine developed by Bharat Biotech. So in Delhi, Pune, and Vellore, we did the studies that showed us that the vaccine had 55% efficacy against severe disease, which is pretty good for a rotavirus vaccine in developing countries. This was licensed by the Indian regulatory authorities in 2014, and we kept pushing and pushing and pushing to get this vaccine into the program. And in 2016, the vaccine was finally introduced, first in 4 states, then 4 more states, then more states. And in 2019, we have the entire country covered with rotavirus vaccines using the vaccine from Bharat Biotech and the vaccine from Serum Institute of India. Now, in addition to the work on vaccine development, one of the things that I've always been fascinated by, studying diarrhea, studying the gut, trying to understand, why are children stunted? What is going on here? We've been trying to do a lot of studies to try and figure out why oral vaccines only had 55% efficacy in developing countries. And this is true for other vaccines in Africa as well. But, they are 90% efficacious in Northern Europe or in the US. Why does this happen? So we kind of divided it conceptually into two areas, which is factors that lower the amount of virus in the vaccine, which is the antibodies or stomach acids that could decrease the virus, or factors that affect the antibody response. So for every check there, that's a study that I have done. Each of these is usually a separate clinical trial where we tried to explore whether manipulating these factors will allow us to increase the response to vaccines. And pretty much we've had failure after failure. I have not come up for any solutions for how to improve the performance of these vaccines. We have some signal from zinc and probiotics showing that nutrition and environmental entropathy likely matter, but this requires even more investigation. Now, while we've been doing all of this, I think one of the most exciting things has been building a team and working with that team within my department, with other departments and across the institution. When you have so many people who are ready, willing, and able to work with you, it becomes exciting to do things together. When I started out in 2000 working in this area after coming back from the US, I was pretty much on my own. There was me, one technician, and one microbiologist. And now we have a team that is nearly 200 people if you take the field teams into account. So we've learned a lot. We've had a few successes. We've had lots of failures. But what it has taught me is that good science can be done in India. You can do laboratory science. You can do clinical science. You can do public health research in India if you have the will and the right partnerships. So now I'm starting something that is even more ambitious. This is a project on pregnancy risk stratification, and I'm not going to do it in Tamil Nadu. I'm going to work in Haryana and in Assam. And the reason that I want to work in Assam is because if you look at mothers and children, in India, if we look at maternal mortality or infant mortality rates in Karimganj district, where we are starting this new project, it's double of the average in India. This is an area that has great need, and we think we can contribute. What will we be doing? We'll be recruiting pregnant women early in pregnancy, trying to identify the ones that are high risk and the ones that are low risk, tracking the ones that are high risk, and making sure that they get the care that they need to have good birth outcomes. And for all other patients, making sure that we do not have them transition into the high risk group. It's ambitious, it sounds really simple, but it's not something that has been tried so far. As you all probably know, most women who deliver don't deliver in primary care or secondary care. If we can afford it, we go to the best hospitals we can find. And for normal deliveries, that's actually not required. And from a health system's perspective, what happens is that high risk patients don't get the care they need because the facilities that provide the care they need are already stretched dealing with normal births. So that's one project that I'm starting. And the other project that I want to try and do is to set up human infection studies in India, which is to get people to volunteer to participate in infectious disease research. There is a typhoid challenge model that has been established in Oxford. Bharat Biotech developed the world's first typhoid conjugate vaccine. It was licensed in India, and we had no idea of the efficacy data until it was evaluated in Oxford, where 400 people volunteered to drink typhoid bacilli after vaccination, and that showed that the vaccine worked really well. And this vaccine is now being used in multiple countries around the world, including in Pakistan, where there is an extensively drug resistant typhoid strain that is circulating. Of course, this is something that is considered as potentially being ethically contentious, but I think if we go about it the right way, this is something that can be done. So far around the world, almost 50,000 people have participated in studies like this. And for malaria vaccines, this is a requirement by regulators to progress the development of vaccines. And in the UK, on the 17th of February, they approved challenge trials for COVID 19 as well. So, for me, what have I learned in 30 years of a professional life? I think for women in particular, family and friends are really important for me. They've been life saving in many ways. Very important to have a strong foundation, and I think CMC gave me that. So I've never been afraid to ask for help. And, there's no point in drowning when you can actually shout for help. I think being curious, asking questions to find the answers is the most empowering thing you can think of doing in the world. You can do this, or you can find out that it can't be done quite that way, and then you can think of alternate strategies. If you believe you can solve problems, you will solve problems if we stay with them long enough or we get the right help. That right help may be in your institution, maybe in the country, maybe somewhere in the world, but together, this is something that we definitely can do. I think it's very important to recognize that each and every one of us can make a difference, and we should try to do that no matter what we choose to do. So, thank you very much for your attention. These are children from my community, and it's kind of a joy to see them grow up, see them thrive. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Kang, for a wonderful lecture and your journey. Yeah, I knew that your father was in railways, but I did not know that you were in Kashapada as well. Yeah. So that was great.
It got very relevant to
Yeah,
ISO.
very relevant. Yeah. So I think we'll take questions. Anindita, can you moderate
Yes,
the questions? Yeah.
yes, absolutely. Thank you, Professor Kang. It was really nice, and I'm really sorry about the slides. I was so engrossed in listening to you, I didn't want to interrupt for a while. Then I realized you really needed to show us your slides. So we have the first question here from Dr. Bidisha Sinha, who is a faculty in biological sciences. And she's saying, how much are the Anganwadi people aware of your work, because they are really the ones who would be, needing this kind of research, and they would need to interact.
So, in the area that we work in, the Anganwadi workers are involved. And I think one of the reasons, so when you think about malnutrition, you think about acute malnutrition and chronic malnutrition. And over the past 30 years, both have significantly declined in Tamil Nadu. In fact, one of the reasons I don't work in Tamil Nadu so much anymore is because Tamil Nadu is doing very, very well. So acute malnutrition is almost not a problem. Chronic malnutrition used to be about 65% in the early 2000s. It's less than 30% now and declining as the economic status of people plays a role. One of the biggest things that has changed in Tamil Nadu is the midday meal scheme, and the midday meal scheme giving the children eggs every day. So they are getting reasonable protein in their diet. They are not chronically malnourished, and they are generally doing much better in schools. So what we've done is we have multiple birth cohorts recruited at different times, and we can actually track the difference across a period of 10 years in how children have grown and how they perform in school. So, absolutely, Anganwadi workers are very aware of everything that we are doing, and this is data that we present at local and state level, as well as occasionally nationally.
In fact, I was going to ask you about the midday meals. So you said this about Tamil Nadu. Do we also have data from other parts of India about how the midday meals are helping, or how important it is to supplement the diet with proteins, or is it data only from one state?
All states have some amount of data on the implementation of the midday meal scheme. So, 2 years ago, we had the report from the Comprehensive National Nutrition Survey, which was the largest such survey that has been done in the country. Every state was sampled, and that has very detailed data that's available on the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare website. There are both biological markers as well as anthropometry and the kind of epidemiological, socio-demographic information that informs nutrition.
So another question I wanted to ask you from here is about your cohorts of children. So since you've been tracking them for a really long period of time, and you have data on their performance in schools, and you said that some of them are already now doing jobs. So, there is this general feeling that people often say that children from socioeconomically backward community also have a tendency to go into unsocial activities, and there can be a lot of stress related issues. So do you have any data on behavior changes because of improvement in their socioeconomic conditions, or diet, or education?
So our cohorts are relatively small, and I have not looked at antisocial behavior in the children in our cohorts. I think that's really interesting, and I will ask the team to follow up. We know that domestic violence in the households that the children are growing up in is a serious issue. It's certainly something that we have tracked. It's sometimes, but not always, related to alcoholism.
Thank you. So another question which we have, this is now turning towards COVID-19. Of course, you cannot avoid COVID-19 questions when you are speaking. So there was towards probably 6 months back a lot of discussion about look. I think you had also commented on it at some point of time about looking for the impact of COVID or the extent of infection in a country by not looking at people but looking at sewage. And there was some discussion about it. Could you shed some light about on it about why this is relevant and what kind of information we can get out of it?
So, sewage is an early indicator. So, even a lot of people who have SARS-CoV-2 infection are asymptomatic. And we know that most people who have a cough, so this we know from tuberculosis, for example. If you have respiratory tuberculosis, one of the tests that you do is look in the gut for TB bacilli, right? You do a fasting gastric juice assessment because you expect to see them, people swallow what they have coughed up. So, and SARS-CoV-2 replicates in the gut. So sewage is going to have, if people in a community are infected with SARS-CoV-2, chances are sewage is going to have SARS-CoV-2 in it. And this allows you to then act like a funnel where you get samples from lots of people by collecting it at a selected few points to be able to say yes or no, there is infection upstream of where this sewage was collected. And if you can put this in place in communities, it acts as a pretty good indicator of where the virus is circulating. And this has been shown in multiple cities. Wherever you have a sewerage system, it is possible to sample a large number of people as a collective sample rather than going individually and sampling each of them. So it's a good catch-all technique in a way.
Thank you. We have a new question here. Apparently, statement today morning that the pandemic is at its end game in India. Would you like to comment on that?
I wish I was so confident.
Yeah, looking at the rest of the world, it's difficult to comment, right?
Yeah, I
Okay,
think,
so
with infectious diseases, this virus has surprised us in the past, right? We expected it to be a respiratory virus. We now know that it affects multiple organ systems. We initially did not know it had human to human spread. Initially, we did not know that this virus could spread asymptomatically. We did not know that variants would emerge so quickly. So I don't think we know enough about this virus or its circulation or what the future holds for us to be confident today that the pandemic is in the end game. I wish it were that easy. I don't think it is. I'm very
we
happy
all
to be
hope
wrong,
it's
though.
going to end. We all hope so. Let's just hope for the best. So on that note, let's end because I know you have other commitments at 11:30, so I will not keep you hanging for too long. Let us thank Professor Kang for this wonderful talk. It was really fascinating listening to your journey. And I've been tweeting about some of this. I hope you can catch up on that later. Just to keep people interested about what you're talking about, even if they're missing the talk directly. Thank you, Professor Pal, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here for the session too. And thanks to all our viewers who are here live. And please share the link to the talk. It's going to be available on YouTube. And once again, I'd like to thank Professor Kang for invitation and being here with us today.
Thank you,
Thank
Professor
you
Khan.
very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you for coming in. I know you have a very busy schedule today, particularly. So I think it was a great pleasure listening to you.
Thanks,
Thank
Dr.
Thank you.
Pal. Thanks,
Yeah.
Anandita.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.